I'm Leslie. That's my introduction. I got into the movement in the early 90s as a young teenager through the sort of like a subculture music scene. Going to shows, people were handing out flyers and zines and different information about, especially about the underground animal liberation movement, which I thought was really exciting at the time. I think I was 15. And it's kind of a strange way to enter into it, but you have to understand that at the time, in the early 90s, there was somewhat of a decent-sized subculture music scene that actually had a pretty strong connection to radical animal rights stuff, and there were a decent amount of my contemporaries kind of came out of that awareness. So I was in Buffalo at the time, which is where I'm from, where I live. I went out to San Francisco to live there for a while. I was 16, and I got involved in defense of animals. They had some campaigns against vivisection, which probably everyone knows is testing on animals, scientific research on animals, and I got involved with some people that I met at these demonstrations, and I guess it was just my nature. I got real into doing more radical stuff. I got into civil disobedience, actually, and did this. I helped out with the civil disobedience at UC Berkeley against vivisection, and that was the first time I really felt like I was involved in the movement. I helped a friend scale a building and did sort of like a lookout and did some support groundwork for him camping out there for a few days. We hung a banner about the vivisection that was going on at UC Berkeley at the time. That was super exciting, super cool. I felt like I was involved in something cool and exciting, and more or less like started dedicating my life to that at that point, moving in that direction. I like to think that, excuse me, that it was just, you know, like for example, if I was in the living as a young adult, a teenager in the 1890s, that I would have gotten involved in the Underground Railroad. For me, I like to think that it was just sort of a you know, what was presented, what happened to fall on my plate at the time that I got involved in the animal liberation struggle, and really it was about a bigger sense of struggling for freedom, which I'll get into more. And so, because of my consequences and the way things were when I was getting involved, you know, I definitely moved towards animal liberation at first and got really involved in that. So I moved up to Portland, Oregon, and got involved in this group that just started called the Liberation Collective. And we have this mission statement. It was called Linking Social Justice Movements to End All Oppression. And that sounded like a pretty cool idea to me because, like I said, I didn't just care about animal issues. I cared about other things, but I didn't know how to plug into those other things. In fact, even before I got involved in the Liberation Collective, I was really into the ALF, the Animal Liberation Front, which is an underground group. Steals animals from labs and sometimes burns them down, stuff like that. I thought that was really cool. And I was also really into Earth First, which is at the time was a semi-underground group. They had an above-ground presence, but there was also the notion that they went out at night and sabotaged bulldozers to protect the environment and stuff like that. So I was kind of looking for these more radical fringes of both the animal and the environmental movement at the time, and wound up with this group, Liberation Collective, which was a nonprofit in Portland. And like I said, they were trying to link social justice movements to end all oppression, or at least that's what we said. And we had these tables. We'd go to conferences and we had tables, and we'd have all this free literature out there, and it would be on just about everything that we could find that was progressive and exciting. So we had stuff on there about women's issues or queer issues or whatever we could find, not just animal stuff for sure. The majority of it wasn't animal stuff, but there was a good chunk of animal stuff in there. And when it came down to what we actually did, truth be told, everything that we led was animal related. Because that's where we were all coming from. Even though we were trying to step outside that box a little bit, the truth is everyone in that group was coming from an animal rights background, animal liberation background. And so all the campaigns that we led were, not only were they animal related, they were actually all anti-vivisection. We did do occasional support work for some other animal issues like the circus or McDonald's that were going on at the time, but really we were primarily an animal rights group, and that's the way the community viewed us, regardless of how much stuff we put out on our table and regardless of our mission statement. We also did a lot of support work and began to cross some boundaries, which was really important at the time. This is 1996, 97. So that we would be a big support organization for a lot of other efforts in the area. There was a big campaign against Nike for sweatshop labor, and Nike is based just outside of Portland. And it was a big popular local campaign, and we did a lot of support work for them. we would get a lot of people out there demonstrations. We get a lot of the rowdy people out there demonstrations, which they liked, and we would do a whole lot of support. Like the Mumia Abu Jamal case was real big at the time, and we did a lot of work around that. But we were never the lead force in anything that wasn't animal liberation related or even anti-dissection related. So that's what we were really focusing on, whether we understood it or not. Then this thing happened. We started doing a lot of civil disobedience against this particular vivisection campaign that we were doing. We were getting on the news a lot, getting arrested a lot. Probably have about 24, I think, arrests for vivisection during those years. And we started talking out, people would wonder why you're so radical. And there were a lot of other progressives in that area at the time, but they wanted to know why, why are you guys the ones that are doing all this civil disobedience all the time, guys and gals? And so people would start asking us questions like that, and one thing led to another, and a lot of times we would talk about how we've supported the underground as well. Not only were we supporting civil disobedience, but we supported the Animal Liberation Front, and we would give lip service to, things like the Underground Railroad, the Black Panther Party, that we also saw as sort of allied with what we were doing during different eras. We also started getting, because we were becoming known for supporting underground and illegal activity, at least theoretically, we suddenly started getting these communiques sent to us from the Animal Liberation Front. So the Animal Liberation Front is an underground group. They can't come out and say, we did this, and here we are, because they'll get carted away to jail. So what they do is they write what they call a communique, and they send it to the press, or they send it to sympathetic activists who didn't have anything to do with it. And so for one reason or another, we started getting these communiques, and we decided to talk to the press about them. And as time went on, that became more and more of a dominating activity in what I was doing in terms of activism. And then this group, the Earth Liberation Front, started taking actions, came out of the woodwork, and it was super exciting because it was the environmental movement turning up the heat the way the animal liberation movement was, and it was crossing boundaries and breaking all kinds of stereotypes and really energizing and awakening people to the possibility, beyond what they say we can do legally in order to bring about positive change. So the Earth Liberation Front, not only were they doing actions similar to the Animal Liberation Front, but focused on environmental issues, they were actually upping the ante quite a bit. Their actions were considerably larger at the time than the majority of ALF actions, causing more damage and gaining more attention. And so we started getting communiques from the ELF, the Earth Liberation Front as well, and putting those out. And time went on, and we had some internal problems, likely spawned and prodded by the FBI in our organization, and it fell apart. And so a couple of us had to figure out what we were going to do from here. And so we were no longer with the Liberation Collective, and we decided to form what we called the Earth Liberation Front Press Office, which was just, all it was like, an above-ground news service that was talking sympathetically with, to the media and to the public about the ELF, why they did what they did, helping people bridge the gap because they can't come out and speak for themselves. And that became very, very much a full-time job because the ELF were doing more and more actions, averaging $2.5 million every month during a few years there, which we were doing this, and they were against large corporations, Boise Cascade, some household names. The Vail arson, which we did, was $24.5 million. It was the world's biggest ski resort to stop expansion into lynx habitat that was going on at the time, and so on. I won't get too much into that unless people have questions later. But what that started to do, you see, the ELF weren't just an environmental group. They were really cutting edge on a lot of different ways. They did an action against the Mexican consulate in support of the Zapatistas, and so on, and a number of different they started this whole thing against SUVs and a thing against anti-sprawl through their actions. Like some of the first actions that brought awareness about how SUVs are such gas guzzlers were the ones that ELF had done and affiliates. And the same thing with sprawl. A lot of the reason why people talk about sprawl is because for a few years there, a lot of these developments were getting burnt down by the ELF. It was making front page news of New York Times, etc. So it was expanding the definition of what is an environmental issue, or what is important to fight about. And so in that way, I was also, that was like another, what I'm trying to say is that was like